Okay, it is 7 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. It looks like I have my same slide up here I've had for 3 weeks now. I just want to make everybody aware of the things that I'm doing to help you grow the very best food in the entire world. I've got my YouTube channel. I've got my free Zoom meeting, which is what this is. I have my Patreon page, which is a subscription page with access to over 300 videos. I've got my 17-week farmer training course. I'm a soil laboratory, so I can tell you if you have healthy little critters in your soil that will do the mineralization so that you don't have to buy fertilizer. And you'll also become more disease and pest free if you're growing in healthy soils. So I help you figure out your soil. And I also do consulting. If you want to hire me to do consulting, I can help in many ways to get your farm going. Let me go to the next slide if I can figure that out. Tonight, our subject is edible cover crops for wintertime. I'm going to be talking mostly about the greenhouse. You also could grow these cover crops in the winter if you're in a mild climate. If you don't have a lot of snow on the ground in your climate, then this would work well for you. If you happen to be in the Mojave Desert, which is, Tokerville, Utah is probably on the border of the Mojave Desert. This would work. I grew up in Hurricane, Utah down there, and we're right on the border. A lot of the plants that grow there are the indicators showing that we are at those lower elevation desert areas, which is pretty awesome. So a lot of these things would grow in an outside situation. Some years they'll freeze out and die. Other years they will continue to grow. But we are going to be focusing on the greenhouse. 2 times this week, I had people contact me and they asked the same question. They said, what can I do with my greenhouse for the soil this winter? I'm not going to be growing a lot of food in part of my greenhouse. I have open space. I have areas in the greenhouse that I'm not going to be utilizing and using. What do I do to keep it healthy? And I told them, plant it to a cover crop. And then they wondered how to do that. And what I'm going to tell you to do is to do a completely edible cover crop. That way, if you get hungry, these are just normal things that you would grow. But let's just talk about this because this is a whole new way of thinking about it. Usually when we think of a cover crop, we're thinking of maybe acres, like a big patch outside, a couple of acres or 20 acres or 2,000 acres. And you're going to seed that down to something that will keep the soil covered, to keep the microbes fed. But we actually can do that in a greenhouse just as well. But in a greenhouse situation, we can grow edibles in there. And then if we find that we need more food, it's already growing, which is pretty great. But these plants will grow and they will give you the opportunity to feed your soil, build good soil health at the same time as having food. But we've already established that this is extra space. You don't need to be growing food. So why grow the food crops? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could grow hairy vetch and cereal rye, all those other things that you can use, those cool weather crops in there. It would be totally fine. I grew some last year in my solar greenhouse. It was a fun experiment to do. But I think that it would be wise to grow edibles just because I like the idea, and I've never really heard people promote this very much, of using a completely edible cover crop inside your greenhouse. But why wouldn't we do it? It just seems like a really fun and exciting thing to do. So the edible cover crops for winter, with all cover crops, whether they're in your greenhouse, whether they're edible, whether they are on a big, acreage or a small garden plot, doesn't matter. Divide them into 2 groups. I don't care how big it is. I don't care what the purpose is. Divide your plants into 2 groups, the taproots and the fibrous roots. And here's why. To maximize your soil health, you want to have taproots and fibrous roots growing together. You simply want them to grow together. You wouldn't want to grow all fibrous roots or all taproots. You need to mix them up. The reason for that is because it advances your soil health a lot quicker than if you're growing them separate. So if I had 1 year of fibrous roots and then I rotate and the next year it's taproots, I'm gonna have 2 years worth of healthy growing. But if I did 1 year of fibrous roots and taproots, I get the same benefit in 1 year. So it speeds things up. So instead of 2 years of soil health practices, I've had 1 year with the same benefit. So that's pretty awesome. Mix up your taproots and your fibrous roots. So if there's something here that you don't eat on this list, on this slide, let's say you hate beets, you hate collards, you don't eat lettuce, but you eat everything else on here. What would you, could you just eliminate the things you don't use? Sure, you can. But remember, the more species you grow, the better you will be advancing your soil health. And the purpose for this is a cover crop. It's not to eat. We're not growing a garden to eat. If you're going to grow a garden to eat, you'll probably do it a little bit different. Although I have done a few plots where I just mixed everything up and threw it out there, and it was really fun to go out there and harvest a whole bunch of food. It really was an exciting thing to go out, you harvest a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of like a surprise. It's like Christmas morning. You go out there and you see what's out there, and you forgot you even planted it, and here's some big beautiful thing ready to harvest. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. You know what? There's one on here. I'm gonna go like this, and then like that. And we're gonna edit this right now, and I'm gonna put down turnip. 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 There's probably a bunch of these. I just went off the top of my head. There, turnips are on there. Now, do we eat turnips? Do we love them? Or are they weird? Or are they bizarre? Guess what? Your soil is going to love turnips. Your soil is going to love every one of the things that are on here. Now, all of these are cold weather crops. These will grow in the winter time in your garden. These will grow in your greenhouse. Now, if you get snow on the ground that stays for a while in very cold temperatures, a lot of these things are going to die back. They're not going to do much. It will seem dormant. But in your greenhouse, if you have extra space, and a lot of people do have extra space in the greenhouse, I would say to take these seeds and just plant a diverse species cover crop mix and just put them in there. So how are you going to do that? Let's go to our next slide here. I want you, excuse me, I want you to break every rule of gardening when you do this. I want you to just take all of the seeds, put them in a bowl or a bucket, just dump all those seeds in a bucket, mix them all up. Just rip your packets open like you're having an angry tantrum, throw all the seeds in there, mix it all up, and then go out there to your garden plot and just scatter them around. Seeds are pretty small, so you don't want to just dump them in one place. That's not going to work. But you need to just scatter them, just sow them around. So just think of like your garden is like a plate of food, and you're going to take a salt shaker and you're going to spread salt evenly around that plate of food. Well, that's what you're doing with this garden plot. Just put those seeds on there evenly all across the garden plot, and start out doing it kind of so they're kind of thin. And when you get done, how many seeds do you have left over? Did you plant half of them? Did you plant like just a few? You know, only 1/10 of them. But if you kind of get an idea of how many you planted, then you can go back and like replant, make them a little thicker. How thick are you going to plant these? I don't care how thick you plant these. Just plant them really thick. You want to plant them in there so that they are, you just want a lot of them in there. So I don't know, every seed should be maybe 1 inch apart or something. But you're like a greenhouse that's 30 feet wide and 100 feet long. Let's say you're going to plant half of it to a mix like this. So you're going to go 30 feet wide and 50 feet long. It better not take you more than 5 minutes to plant this, because you're just going to go in there and you're just going to scatter it around by hand. And after a minute you'll get good at it and you can be able to scatter it around. So just broadcast it out there on the soil. You might take a rake and just lightly rake it in so it mixes a little bit. Turn your water on, water it every night and morning. Keep the soil moist every day, like every night and morning. But for about 2 weeks it needs to be moist. I wouldn't wait 2 or 3 days in between waterings in that first week, because you want all those seeds to come up. And you haven't planted them deep, you haven't hardly planted them at all. You just scattered them out there. That's why you're keeping the soil wet for a couple of weeks. And then these will sprout and grow. So that'll be pretty awesome. So I want you to break rules though. If a bunch of weeds come up, good. You want a diverse species of plants growing. Let the weeds grow. Don't make a bunch of transplants out of these species and try to dibble them in. That is too much work. Just scatter the seeds. Don't worry about it. Just get them out there. So don't get complicated at all. I want you to spend less than 2 calories on thinking about this. Just mix up your seeds, go out there, scatter them around, turn your water on, and then make sure your water system's working. And a couple of weeks later, come back and you'll have a carpet of green all over the place. The thicker it is, the better. I mean, you're not going to plant 300 pounds of seed in a small garden spot, but you'll just I don't know even what seeding rates to tell you, but just plant them out there and see what happens. And if you remember how many seeds you planted the next time, you'll know if you want to plant them thicker or not as thick as you got it done. But but this is an exciting way to grow soil, is to grow things you can eat. See, later on in the winter, you're going to have kale and spinach. You just have a jungle of food out there, and it will grow and it will thrive and it will do good. And if there's weeds out there, let's say in March, there's a bunch, because I'm assuming you're going to do this week. This is your homework. But let's say in March, you go out there and there's a bunch of weed seeds, like seed heads that are coming up. Well, how do we manage weeds? Remember back to our weed management classes, any weed that's putting up seeds, you cut off those seed heads or you pull the plants. So you can manage the weeds later. But for right now, let them grow to help the soil become really, really healthy. And we have to remember the purpose of this is soil health. The entire purpose is to create a really good, beautiful soil health. We want the soil to grow. We want it to thrive. We want the bacteria and the fungus and the protozoa and the nematodes and the earthworms, the encotriids, the microarthropods and the macroarthropods, all of those creatures that are living in the soil, we want them to be well fed. And the best way to feed them is by having a beautiful multi-species cover crop in there. Let me just go back to the first slide here real quick, and let's think about this. Let's go through this list. Beets, highly nutritious for people. They're a taproot. The taproot's going to go down deep. It'll help break up hard pans. Carrots, super nutritious for people, super popular for people. They also are going to go down. They can help break up hard pans. And what else about carrots? They obviously grow in the winter. All these grow in the winter. Chard. Chard actually is a taproot. It's the same species as the beet. And so different varieties of beets and chard will be doing different things with the roots, but they're all in the taproot family. Radishes, there's a lot of kinds of radishes. There's the little red ones. There's all sorts of radishes. There's the big giant ones. There's the Mangelwurzel type sugar beet radishes. There's the daikon radish, which have been called tiller radishes because they'll till your soil for you. So I would get 8 or 9 types of radishes in there if you can. Lettuce, just get a mix, like a mesclun mix that has all kinds of lettuces. Usually a mesclun mix will have some spinach, lettuce, mustards, and those are all really good things. Why did I put lettuce in taproots? That is such a mistake. We're going to fix that right now. Lettuce is a fibrous root. we're gonna cut that, and we're putting it over here somewhere. And we're gonna paste that right there. Lettuce is definitely a fibrous root. It should not have been in the taproot side. It's a good thing we're going through this. Spinach and turnips. Why is spinach in the... What kind of an editor do I have anyway? I wonder if I can drag that over here. Is that possible? No, it wasn't possible. Okay, here we go. Spinach, spinach. It's a good thing we're looking at these. Okay, that's a better chart now. Taproots, beets, carrots, chard, radishes, turnips. Fibrous roots, kale, cabbage, broccoli. Yeah, fibrous. Kale, cabbage, broccoli, collards, claytonia, garlic, onions, green onions, shallots, that whole allium family, cilantro, parsley, dill, peas, lettuce, spinach. Let's look at legumes. What legumes do we have in here? The only one on this list for winter time are peas. There are other legumes for winter growing, like the vetch family, but well, I'm calling it a family. It's a legume is the real family, but vetches, but they're not human edible, so that's why they're not on this list. So peas, they're our nitrogen fixer, but we don't need so much nitrogen. A lot of the gardening books are always talking about, oh, you got to have the nitrogen fixers. I hear that from the permaculture people too. You got to have your nitrogen fixers. And it's great to have nitrogen fixers. Don't get me wrong, but they're not as important as just general soil health. If you're feeding your soil with this diverse cover crop mix, then the organisms that are creating the nitrogen cycle happen. They're going to be present. They're going to be there. So we've got the rhizobium. That's the organism that works in the roots of the legumes to create nitrogen, and they create it for that plant, and you don't get the benefit of the nitrogen from that plant until that plant dies. So I like to have legumes that are growing for the next year's crop. But what about, how do you get the nitrogen in there right now for this year's crop? And one way to get that in there is just to have the really good soil health, and hopefully you're attracting azobacter and azospirillum. Those are free living nitrogen fixers, and they don't have to work with a plant. They're just living in the soil, helping that nitrogen cycle work. So they're fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere without a legume. So when you have these multi-species cover crop mixes and you're keeping living roots in the soil all year, you can start attracting some of these other really beneficial organisms. And here again, how do you actually get them in there? Well, nobody knows. I mean, when it comes to microscopy or the microscopic world, everything is everywhere. So we just have to remember that if we create the conditions for a specific organism, it's going to show up and it's going to be there. So I don't have an answer of how we get the azobacter and azospirillum. We could certainly, like if we purchased some, if there's somebody selling it, then that would work. But the thing is, just get your soil working by growing the right crops and by making good compost and inoculating with compost, and then these benefits start happening. But this is just a fun idea, and I told 2 people this week who contacted me. I simply told them, why don't you grow an edible cover crop? And neither one of them had ever even thought of that. They were thinking of cover crops of things like hairy vetch and cereal rye and daikon radish, and you would grow that, and there it was, which is fine. But why aren't we growing all these other things? Let's just look at the chart I made here. Let's count plant families. Beets and chard are one plant family. Carrots are another. Turnips are another. Fibrous, we've got lettuce. Spinach is Let me think. Kale, cabbage, broccoli, collards, those are all the same. It looks like we have maybe 7 plant families here. With the cilantro, parsley, and dill, we may have 8 or 9. So there's a lot of plant families that are going to be growing together. So, this is exciting to me to think of having that many plant families growing all together. I would kind of like to start a garden, like an edible food garden, not a cover crop garden, and we do it exactly like this. But our purpose is to just grow food to eat. Now, it would be scary. It'd be a nightmare if you had customers counting on the food because you don't know how many of what's going to grow because stuff just starts growing crazy. And what if your cabbage got gigantic and it like crowded out all your spinach or whatever? There's crazy things. But the allium family, which is garlic, onions, green onions, shallots, all those things, they are highly mycorrhizal, meaning that they will attract and help your mycorrhizal fungi colony grow in the soil, which helps to create the later successions. So growing those with your early succession of cabbage, broccoli, and collards, it's interesting to see on new soils what happens. So if you already have mycorrhizal fungi in your soil, your cabbage, kale, broccolis, they may not even grow. They might start to grow and then they die very quickly. So if you planted a big garden like this and you have a lot of everything in that cabbage family, the kale, cabbage, broccoli, collards, cauliflower, it's not on this list, but it's in the same family. Like, let me think. So a lot of the mustards and rutabaga turnips, they're in that family also. But if those all really thrived and did well, it would be an indicator to you that you're in an early succession soil. And if they didn't do as good, it would show you that you're in a mid to late succession soil. So just by planting all these out there and seeing what happens, it can start to show you what your ecology actually is and where you're at. So that is the end of me preaching tonight. Do we have any questions? Any questions at all? I'm just thinking how exciting it would be just to do an entire garden like this next year. I mean, we could do it right now. I don't have room in my greenhouse. It's clear full of stuff right now, but it would be pretty fun. Okay, Helena says, peas in the winter, will they grow? Yes, they will grow. It depends. If you're in a greenhouse, they certainly will grow. Peas can handle some very light frost. The earlier the pea plant is, the better it grows. But you've got to remember that the purpose of what I'm talking about tonight is not to grow food, but it is to grow your healthy soil. So even if you got 6 weeks of growth out of that pea plant, it would be very beneficial to the, to your gardening, to the soil, to help that soil health, to get that garden going really good. So yeah, they will grow. In the, if you're just doing it outside, they are not very hardy. They're gonna die as soon as you get a good frost. Like if your frost gets down to the mid-20s, they're probably gonna kill the plants. So they're hopefully that helps. But in a greenhouse, I mean, in my greenhouse here, we got down to, what was it? I think 28 degrees last year on one night. That was our coldest inside the greenhouse because I think we were -8 or 9 outside. It was really cold outside. It got down to 28 inside, and it did damage a bunch of my peas, but it didn't kill them because I've had peas growing in there year round for, a year and a half now. So it's pretty awesome. Usually the place that they get damaged the quickest is on the fruit. So if you have the little pea pods on there, those will freeze and they will get damaged the quickest, quicker than other stuff. So like the leaves and stems, the other parts of the plant. I'm just thinking about how cool it would be if we like did a garden like this outside next year. Why don't we break all the garden rules? It'd be great. Somebody needs to start doing more research on new ways of doing things. And I think a 5-gallon bucket of garden seed completely mixed together and you just sowed it out there and then just see what happens. I kind of did that this year, but maybe I'll do it better. So more make it more serious next year. Okay, Helena says, sounds great. We actually did this yesterday. Cut off our squash plants and tall summer plants and just threw out a bunch of lettuce and cilantro. Need to do taproots. We even found a cute little snake in there. That's fun. It's always awesome when you see wildlife. So yeah, man, get you some taproots out there. Get you some daikon radishes or whatever. Any kind of taproot. That'd be pretty great. So that's pretty exciting. But this is I hadn't really thought about doing this. I think I'm actually going to add this to this discussion we're having tonight to my boot camp curriculum and to my all the other classes that I do, because I was just thinking about it this week and my people who contacted me, they're like, what can I plant in my greenhouse this year? Like right now for winter. I'm thinking, yeah, well, whatever. And then this just kind of popped in my head. Well, why not do it this way? Because we grow these things all winter anyway, and we're out there, we're working hard, we're spacing them out, we're doing transplants, we're dibbling holes and putting the transplants in. Why don't we just throw it out there like the wind throws stuff around in nature and just water it good like fall rains? And then we have the protection of the greenhouse. Maybe we're working way too hard to grow food. Maybe there's better ways. And if we mess it up a whole bunch and have fun doing it, maybe we could come up with some nicer ways to grow food that aren't so crazy. No, if a person's OCD about this, maybe you shouldn't try it. I would hate to damage you further in your mental world. I can say that I have a lot of OCD tendencies. Somebody's out there planting stuff and they're getting 2 seeds in a hole, and I'm like, no, you're messing it up. Oh dear. I need to take a deep breath. I need to go to my room and count to 10. Okay, do we have any more questions tonight? If we don't, we're going to call this good, and I will get this recording on YouTube for everybody else who watches these on YouTube.